Hi, I'm Jordan McDonald, staff writer with GovCIO Media and Research, and today I'm joined by Jacob Glassman, Senior Technical Advisor for the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. Hi, Jacob. Thanks for joining us.
Jordan, it's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Um, Jacob, you've got like a really interesting role at the Department of the Navy with research, acquisition, and development, and you are working on a new, I guess, acquisition program called MOSA. Could you sort of help me understand what that is?
Sure, absolutely. A couple things. Let me just set the groundwork on what MOSA is. So it's not new. It's actually a little bit old, and it's not a particular program. It's more of a methodology. So MOSA is modular open system architecture. So it's foundationally a process, procedure, fundamentals on how we do engineering. So, for example, you have Bluetooth as a standard, right? So you could be developing a Bluetooth peripheral that, and as long as you meet the standard, you know you're interoperable with multiple different devices, right? It's not like, oh, I have my AirPods in, right? Oh, but that's not compatible. Your Beats or whatever are not compatible because they need to be centered. So the whole idea of modular open system architecture is we need to be developing our combat systems in particular, but really mainly our weapon systems, to have a modular open system architecture instead of these very large monolithic architectures that only one provider can provide. And it also really muscles out innovation and small business. So we really pioneered it. I come from the submarine community. We really pioneered it with our submarine combat systems to be able to be able to do, and I can go on and on and on about this. But what my current role, I was brought on board by Secretary Girton, who I is really the foremost MOSA expert in the country. So I don't hold myself in that regard. I'm more of a disciple. And he brought me on board to really start promulgating MOSA to our programs. And I can get way more into that. So I hope that isn't too much word salad on what modular open system architecture is.
No, no. You've talked about it a little bit, but I do want to just harp in on this or
Mhm.
zone in on this. Could you sort of help me understand like why this interoperability is so important and why the Department of the Navy is shifting towards this mindset?
Absolutely. So actually, Secretary Girton and I wrote an article about this, which I highly recommend everyone read. Not out of selfish, not just out of selfish means, but it really it really defines why this is so important. Okay, so modular open system architecture. I've been pushing this for about 15 years. Secretary Girton and several others, well more than 25 years. And our argument at that point was, hey, first, this is what the commercial world does. Right. That's the only way industries, especially technology industries, can really work. Large monolithic systems very rarely work. They do on occasion, but for the most part, you need to have an architecture where you could take out a component, put in a new component, right? If you have a problem with your engine, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to scrap your whole car. Or the analogy I like to make, like, oh, your radio, um, or your in your car broke. Okay, congratulations. You now need a new car because it's all intertwined with everything else. No, you take it, you can replace that particular module or component, right? So our argument for a long time was really at a cost and schedule and performance, but say more innovation. It should be cheaper because we have more innovation and we can have competition where I can provide standards to be able to interface with my system, but that way I can have multiple different people innovate, propose new solutions, different modules. I'm not stuck on one older module. Um, and also, we should be able to share modules across platforms, right? So if the Army comes up with a great system, I should be able to adopt that in the Navy. And if I come up with a great system, the Air Force should be able to do it. That was the direction we had been going for quite some time. But where the new real push, the impetus was a lot of what's happening in Ukraine right now. So, and this is what the article we wrote talks about is MOSA is a combat capability. And I believe that, and I'm not the only one, obviously, that really believes that more than anything. So we now have a 21st century high-tech battlefield, right? So countermeasures, and the open source ones I always like to point to is our GPS guided 500-pound bombs that we were providing Ukraine. They were extremely effective on the front lines until they weren't all of a sudden because the Russians were able to provide certain countermeasures to them. That's just an open source example. There's plenty others on the high side about that. So if you say, okay, we are going to enter a battlefield potentially that is going to have multiple countermeasures or offensive capabilities too that are going to directly impact our systems. We need to have the architectures of our high-tech systems to be able to counter that counter or exploit that counter. And we won't be able to do that with our large monolithic systems. Be like, okay, no problem. I see that we need to have M code GPS receivers. Don't worry, give us 2 or 3 years. We'll be able to go through this large thing. We need to rip out this old stuff, put in this new stuff, and we'll be okay. No, we should have the plumbing already in place, and not just in one platform, in all of our platforms. So it doesn't necessarily need to be the exact same module, but we need to be able to provide that capability into our in-service platforms rapidly. So that's really the impetus, and that's why we're really passionate about it, at least in the AS and RDA office.
I wanted to ask, does this sort of how does this tie into, I suppose, the DoD's larger CJAD C2 mission, thinking about interoperability, working between service branches, and obviously like future-proofing technology in ways too.
Yeah, I think it plays directly into it. So JADC2 is not a technical thing necessarily. It's more of a war plan, or that's probably not an exact thing. But so that would be like saying, oh, we need to build we need transport capability. Well, okay, well, MOSA's only thing, MOSA, it's a tool. It's a tool suite, right? It's how you build them that is really important. So instead of the Navy building their truck and or organization A builds their, 20-wheeler truck and their Air Force brings a 16-wheeler truck, it's like, no, no, no. Here are the standards. So now all of a sudden so it does play in a JADC2 where you're ensuring that interoperability because you have these modular open system architectures and you can share those standards, right? So I like bringing commercial examples. I brought up the Bluetooth earlier, but 802.11 Wi-Fi. Okay. Do you have to wear, you could have a Wi-Fi peripheral. You are going to work with Wi-Fi, right? And it could be used for multiple different things. My scanner over here works directly with my Mac, also works with a PC. Would work with any other type of a Linux box. I don't need to worry about that because that's how the architecture supports expandable peripherals.
Yeah,
So
and it's
same
really
principle for MOSA.
yeah, it's really interesting. You mentioned all this interoperability, this standard, and how it can work within the Navy and then the DoD as a whole. How does that, I guess, also work with emerging technology and integrating new technologies as they become available as well?
So, outstanding question. This is one I'm actually the most excited about. So, for example, when I was running advanced capability for the Conventional Prompt Strike program, CPS, what we did is we went out and said, okay, an issue. In this particular case, was alternate navigation. How do we fly through a denied environment? And I obviously can't get into too many details on that, but it's like let's go out to let's innovate. Let's go out. We went out through an OTA out of NSWC Crane. We said, give us some good ideas, and we actually had pitch days. Pitch days that said, okay, tell us your idea. And we had non-traditional defense contractors, we had small businesses, we had all this type of stuff. And what we really had were standards that we were putting together. That was based off of actually an Air Force standard. I'm reluctant to give my Air Force friends credit, but they did a really good job with weapon open system architecture, WOSA, and sensor open system architecture, SOSA. Um, and What that does is it expands the innovation, kind of to answer your question, because now all of a sudden may have a small business or a non-traditional defense contractor that's like, well, I have a brilliant idea that could solve your problem, but I either can't afford to do the hypersonic flight testing, or I can't, there's no way I'm going to get Lockheed Martin or Boeing or whomever to listen to me to take my component. And there's no, what I say is here, do you fit this standard? Yes. Okay. Well, I fly hypersonic flights once a quarter, in coordination with OSD. You'll be on the next flight. You're ready. I got the flight already covered. You can fly and you get to keep all your test and evaluation data. So we know whether you're for real or whether you're potential. And we also help you out. That helps your R&D. So it really, I think if I could sum it up in one word is, or one phrase is, it lowers the barrier of entry significantly for new entrants, specifically innovative small businesses and non-traditional defense contractors.
And that ties into what my next question was going to be. When we talk about lowering the barrier of entry and expanding innovation, simple question, but obviously a lot to expand on. What is industry's role in this, and how can they contribute to this MOSA architecture?
Industry is incredibly important. We in the government have a nasty habit of hubris where we think we know better. Or we come up with this brilliant stuff and we throw it out there, and then industry, who are the ones that are actually the performers, right? They're actually turning the wrenches, so to speak, for the most part, right? And they don't really get they kind of inherit these things and like, well, this isn't really completely practical. So industry's role. So we just released our Navy MOSA implementation guide 1.0, and I can expand on that a bit. And that is full and open. It is completely free to use and share. I have sent it to, geez, so many people. And the whole idea is we need industry feedback, right? We want to know, is this useful to you? Our objective is to promulgate MOSA everywhere, but we don't want this to be a government versus industry big fight on, well, industry doesn't want it because that introduces competition, because they're opening it's not really their systems, it is the government systems. I have to remind them of that sometimes. We did pay for it, but there is IP concerns. That's absolutely legitimate, right? So, um, yeah, industry's role is we want to hear from industry, not just the program offices, not just the government side on where are we right, where are we wrong? And that's why we called it Most Invitation Guide 1.0, because we are soliciting feedback from universities, from small businesses, from non-traditionals, from even other industries, non-DoD people are looking at this and said, hey, we want this to be useful. We published this knowing their gaps, but we published it pretty quickly from start to finish. It was about 3 or 4 months before it was signed out by the secretary. I'm a harsh grader. I gave it a B minus. The secretary said it was a B plus, but regardless, it's not an A. We want an A plus, right? But we know we're not going to get there until probably the 3.0 version, right? So we got something out quickly. We're moving fast. We want to hear from industry. Is this just another government thing that we're sending you that's completely useless? Or where is it helpful? Where is it not helpful? Because at the end of the day, we want to be a team here, right? That's how it's really going to work. We want to foster our defense industrial base to be able to, instead of having these niche sub defense industry bases on particular platforms, be it a submarine or a destroyer or an aircraft carrier or an air or space systems, whatever. You have these niche sub industries. Well, if we're able to start having modular components, and I'm just talking Navy there, expand that
Mhm.
to all the other services. Well, now all of a sudden, instead of having one company or one group of company where their bread is entirely buttered by one program or one PEO, if you miss that contract, so say you didn't win that contract, well, that's okay, because all of a sudden your system, you are compatible with multiple other platforms. You can still compete. That should improve your competition space, your customer space. So that's really what we want to hear from industry is where are we right, where are we wrong, when what are we missing?
And that's really interesting to get that industry feedback. I want to ask, you just released 1.0, well, not just released, but a few months ago, let's say relatively recently released
Mm.
1.0. How do we move along that timeline from the 1.0, getting that industry feedback, and then building out that, let's say, final or perfect A plus version with 3.0 in terms of timeline?
Yeah, so we plan on releasing them annually. That's the objective. In industry speak, we're time boxing it, right? Because our objective for 2.0 is for it to get, solid B plus, maybe A minus, and then like following what most development is done, at least tech development, is your minimal viable product really you don't get into the 3.0 version. So that should be within a year after that because we want some runtime with this. And it does a few things. One is really cultural, right? Like we want to be able to start getting people really thinking in this MOSA mindset. Um, and by soliciting this type of feedback from all these different sources, from industry and from the government side, well, now there's actually ownership in it, right? This wasn't just Jake on high and the Pentagon decided to write this giant thing and publish it to everybody. No, no, no. Like, we just got the ball rolling. This is really something that the whole industry, was able to contribute to. So once you have some ownership into it, it's not like you're inheriting an albatross that you can't really deal with. Like we understand, most people really, at least on the technical side, really understand and embrace MOSA. It's an obvious way of doing things. It's actually very strange for programs to not be modular and open system. That's really not the normal, at least for tech development. So that really is the push where they get the ownership, cultural change, and that will get us to the 3.0 version, which I'm hoping will be in the A plus range. But we're going to need a lot of help. We really are.
The Navy's got its own MOSA architecture that you're building out. Could you sort of help me compare that to other service branches and, understanding that the idea is to have a sort of similar mindset between them? How do you reach that? Are you collaborating with them and alongside industry to build this all out?
One thing we've done as a team, and really I'm proud of, is we got a tri-service memo, most implementation memo signed out by the Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Air Force, and Secretary of the Navy. And what that does is it commits each service to fully adopting MOSA for all their acquisition and development. And the thing that really was critical to that was I wrote in the end of that memo a call to action to say, listen, it's one thing for us to send this memo that just says, yes, we like MOSA. MOSA is great, do MOSA. Well, okay, what does that really mean? Because MOSA has been mandated in the NDAA, it's been mandated in a lot of different laws, a lot of different policies, and it has gotten better, but I wouldn't say it's been mass adopted. So for this one, I said, okay, there's going to be a call to action. We now want the so what, show me the proof that you're actually adopting MOSA. So this is what I need you to do, services. Within 60 days of this memo being signed out by all the secretaries, you services need to report back to your SAE, your service acquisition executive, an architecture that is shared between some of your platforms. And you need to identify modules that you're developing in those platforms that could be shared, or in that architecture be shared by one of those platforms. So we've done some of that, but what that's really resulted in is this MOA between the Army and the Navy for aligning architecture for helicopter, so rotary wing mission systems. So it just so happened that I got a call from NavAir, and they said, "Hey, Jake, we're modernizing. We're about to modernize our MH60 Romeo and Sierras. They're kind of old. We're going to need new toys. And by toys, I mean we're going to need new navigation systems that are much more resilient, electronic warfare stuff, advanced communications equipment, all those types of things, and for the 21st century battlefield." Well, I called my Army buddies who had just routed this tri-service memo through, and they said, it's funny you mentioned that. We just lined up our own architectures that way between Chinook, Apache, and Blackhawk. So why don't we sign an agreement between the Army and the Navy to say, well, instead of that, the MH-60 Romeo and Sierra will conform to that. So that way, the individual modules of our mission systems. Now, I'm not talking, the actual stick and flight stuff, the flight sensitive stuff, and I'm talking about again all those advanced capabilities and enabling capabilities. There's no reason why we should be able to share that between MH-60 Romeo and Sierra, Apaches, Chinooks, et cetera, Blackhawks.
The question I have is, as you're combining all of these service branches together under MOSA, WOSA, SOSA, um, how do you, I guess, maintain the security of that? As these systems become more interoperable, and there's more, I guess, communication and integration between service branches for these systems and technologies.
So we are moving all of our systems to a zero trust environment, right? Um, and that's really the only way to do it. We spent a long time in cybersecurity land, just really building up these giant walls to prevent anyone from getting in. Well, spoiler alert, they're going to get in one way or another. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't still be building those walls. You still should, but just because there's someone or some component or node talking to you inside that wall doesn't necessarily mean you should trust them. So that is kind of let me just set the baseline there. Um, but what the cybersecurity and interoperability requirements are no different than any other system. Like they still have to have all those types of requirements. But at the end of the day, with a zero trust environment, that's really the only way to get around that. Because we've tried it the other way for quite a long time, and what that's really done is stagnated us quite a bit. And it's been not as effective as one would really hope. So we've lost a lot of the advantages of the interoperability in the name of security, but what we didn't really get much security out of it, and we lost the interoperability out of it. So MOSA would not interfere with that at all, because in the end of the day, it is still up to the individual modules and components to be able to adhere to their own security requirements.
Understanding that part of MOSA is, I guess, laying out the groundwork to eventually integrate new and emerging technologies, um, while you're also modernizing systems that are legacy. How do you decide, or yeah, I guess make that decision of what's worth architecting, what's worth keeping, and what's worth scrapping, as this all becomes integrated?
Excellent question, and that was one of our main focuses for the Department of the Navy Modular Open System Architecture Implementation Guide version 1.0. So strongly recommend everyone, shameless plug for that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're not going to it is not necessarily, if you have an in-service system that is already in service and already functioning and not due for a tech refresh or anything like that, it really doesn't make any sense to rip that out. But I'll go back to my MA60 uh, example before. Everything gets modernized one way or another. Obsolescence is a real thing, and they're going to be, and it's only going to get more as we're more and more reliant on microelectronics and software. So that will inevitably happen. And the beautiful part of modular open system architecture is it doesn't have to be an all or nothing um, proposition. If you are modernizing, say, the communication system on your legacy program or record, you have to modernize that anyway. Or actually, probably a better one is M code GPS. So we're moving our entire, all of our services are moving to M code GPS. Well, okay. Well, you have a legacy system, so you're saying, oh, you want me to re-architect, rip out everything else just so I can implement this architecture for this M code change? Like, no, no, no. just make that M-cone change compliant with our with a modular open system architecture. Because guess what? At some point, you're going to modernize another component. So it was navigation today, it'll be communications tomorrow, it'll be flight planning computer after that, et cetera, et cetera. So you can kind of see how you could start growing that architecture within legacy programs. And ultimately, that'll eventually almost it's almost like the blob or the amoeba. It'll eventually
Mhm.
consume the whole program once you get there. So that's kind of the best way to kind of have your cake and eat it too. But that is a tougher one to do. Definitely to get support for within the programs because we are extremely risk adverse. And I can go at length on that and how that's really hindered this quite a bit, but the ultimate end state is be able to rapidly introduce new capability and obsolescence avoidance. And MOSA is really the key fundamentals to get you there.
Yeah, absolutely. Jacob, we've covered a lot, but I know there's always more to talk about. I just wanted to ask if there's anything that we didn't touch on that you think is critical for understanding MOSA 1.0 as we move, I guess, on the track to 3.0.
Yeah. No, thank you, Jordan. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your audience. No, you touched. I could talk for hours about this. What I keep telling people is, getting me to talk about it is not the problem. It's getting me to shut up about it is really the issue. But I just really want to hammer home. MOSA is a combat capability. It is a absolute combat capability. If you think we are going to be able to survive with a rapidly technologically evolving battlefield with monolithic, very poorly upgradable systems, then you got another thing coming. We can either do this now or we're going to learn the hard way. Unfortunately, if we enter into that type of conflict. So MOSA is a combat capability, and really we want help from industry on our MOSA implementation guide and really get that feedback on how we could do this better. So that's really kind of where the message I'd really like to put out is we are here, we are having a dialogue with industry. Industry is a partner with us on this.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jacob. I appreciate you taking the time out.
Thank you, Jordan. Really, really appreciate it.
GovCast, along with Cybercast and HealthCast, is a production of GovCIO Media and Research. For more podcasts and to check out the other shows, head to govciomedia.com.